Guess we will just get started. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Lisey Good, and I'm going to be talking about rewilding, which is trendy right now, which is kind of cool. It's trendy probably because the world needs it, and because there was a best-selling book this year that lots of you may have read. But I want to tell you about why it's good to do, how to do it, and how it can help you to sort of do less but have more of the kind of visitors you want to your garden. So I'm going to start with the difference between conservation and rewilding. I think a lot of people think they're the same things, but they're just sort of two sides with the same aim, I guess. Conservation is really like preserving the status quo. It's just setting aside land, for instance, to kind of keep it healthy or keep it free from development, whereas rewilding is setting back the clock. It's literally trying to take it back to before humans, let's face it, who are at the root of all of the problems that we're going to talk about, before humans were so involved, and kind of take it back into a wild state where nature can take over, and then you cannot do anything but benefit wildlife in that way. So most of the really well-known rewilding projects have been with animals. And so I want to sort of start with that. Wolves in Yellowstone. These are Eurasian beavers, which were almost extinct in Europe, and they've been reintroduced. And buffalo or bison. People think that the American creature that looks like this is a buffalo, but it's actually a bison. Anyway, I'll use buffalo because that's what buffaloes roaming or what we're going to talk about. We're not going to talk about it much, but I want to talk about it. I'm not expecting you to welcome buffalo to your yard, but the idea is that buffalo are a really good example of how one species can be more important in terms of the whole system than other species. So the reason that buffalo are hugely important and why they've been reintroduced to the Great Plains is because of their behavior has this outside impact on the rest of the system. So they love to do this, just like pigs do. This is wallowing. They wallow in the dirt, and because they're huge and heavy and they really get into it, they actually create divots in the meadow, which the second it rains, those are pools of drinking water, which then benefit all the other creatures that live in the prairie. So you can see that when you take them away, there are fewer pools, fewer drinking water, and it sort of trickles down the line. They also do other stuff. Their little, not little, their big paws are relatively small for the size and heft of their body. So those things are really creating aerating divots in the ground that can leave room for other plants to grow. They're also, they're chewing the grass down to a certain size, keeping it low enough that then there's more room for other stuff too. So all of these plants are plants that are aided by buffalo or bison. And the most important word in this little poster is native. And that's probably the most important aspect of rewilding. It's the number one question I get when people ask about my group Wild Cohasset, which is dedicated to native plants. What are they and why are they important? So I just want to talk really briefly. I imagine a lot of you already know this, but this is the crux of why rewilding can really help and why it's important. So in America, native plants are simply plants that were growing here before there was widespread colonization. So before 1492, what was growing here is what we are considering native plants. And the reason that I have a rat in this picture is because when people started coming, when the European settlers started coming here, they brought with them, sometimes deliberately, plants, crops, herbs, medicinal things, and they also inadvertently brought things with them. Disease, rats, Norway rats. We did not have them in America prior to ships coming here and then those guys kind of coming off the ships with them. I want to talk 1 second about the difference between North America and a lot of the rest of the world. When we're talking about native plants, I mentioned that it's trendy, that there was a best-selling book about rewilding, and that was one that documented a really fantastic project in England on a huge estate. the reason those authors sort of downplay the importance of native plants, I think that's because they're British. And in England, they nothing against the British, I love them, I used to live there. But in England, they've been colonized, they've been invaded, they've been settled for thousands and thousands of years. So, you know, way back long before the Romans, the Anglo-Saxons and the Celts and the Vikings. So it's way harder to sort of pinpoint what exactly should be there now and what was there originally. Whereas in North America, we've got a complete line. We know exactly what should be here according to what's going to best benefit nature. So native plants, just what was growing here before a lot of us got here and started to sort of tinker with things. So why do they matter? Really quickly, there are a number of reasons, but the first is that they save water. Anytime you save water, you're benefiting the environment. They save water because they evolved here. So they evolved in the exact conditions that they need to thrive. And these two plants are a really good example to me of native versus non-native. Hydrangeas are not native to our area. The word hydrangea, hydra, comes from their love of water. So you probably know, if you have any of these, in July, if it's hot, they are droopy, they need water. The plant on the right is a climbing hydrangea. Now that's not technically native to our region, to New England, but it is native to the southeastern US. It can be the worst drought we've ever experienced, and that stuff is fine. Doesn't need any kind of extra care. So it's just really, to me, a perfect example of one of the reasons why native plants are better, because they save water. The next one is pesticides. They don't need them. For the same reason they don't need extra water. They are from here, they're used to the conditions here, so they don't need all kinds of tinkering the way, you know, delicate roses or grass do to really thrive. Obviously, that's hugely important, and I'm going to touch on it again later. And I know I'm preaching to the choir probably if you're here, but pesticides are a major, major issue that we're facing now. The third reason, and this is probably the crux of what we're going to talk about today, the third reason why native plants are so important is insects. So they evolved, native plants evolved side by side with the insects of our region. So they have this beneficial relationship with each other where they give each other what they need. And very often, one can't survive without the other, or can't as easily survive without the other. And I put this up here because I think if you were to ask a dragonfly or a monarch butterfly what they thought of this, they'd be like, I'm not bird food, I am a bug. But the bottom line is, if you don't have bugs, you don't have birds. Flat out, literally. Birds need bugs. And a lot of people are sort of declaring war on bugs in ways that they're not recognizing might have a connection with birds. So spraying for mosquitoes, treating your grass for grubs, trying to deal with ticks in every way that you can. These things are wiping out insects, which in essence is starving him, okay? So you are starving him. Now, this is a red-tailed hawk, a baby, and first of all, don't worry, because he fell out of the nest, he was unharmed, he was able to be put back, so he's fine. You don't need to worry about him. But he does need bugs. He eats bugs. Even a hawk that grows up to be this vicious hunter, they start out with bugs, and they're really important to their diet. So when you're getting rid of all the bugs, there is absolutely a major impact down the line or up the food chain, however you want to put it, on birds. So the reason that I really want to talk about rewilding and hope that some people will sort of incorporate more is that most of our plants, most of your neighbors' plants, most of the people down the street plants, most of the plants here are not native. So if you look at every single plant on here, none of these are native. Even plants that you think of, like the rugosas, beach roses, they seem so synonymous with our part of the world. They're from Siberia. So when you think about the fact that all of the plants that we're putting into our yards and that we're choosing and that we love, and I'm not telling us to get rid of, but all of these plants may not be benefiting our natural environment the way that the wild stuff is. And that becomes increasingly important because this area is really facing a lot of development pressure. One of the more recent data was that we lose about 65 acres of woodlands a day in New England. So that's not even like, I don't know, former farms. That's actual like places that look like this. So when you swap out a place that looks like that for a place that looks like our yards, you're basically not giving the creatures that need the native plants anything to sustain them. So just as we talked about keystone animals, there are also keystone plant species. And some of those are the ones that I'm hoping we can add back in by rewilding. So 3 that I just want to talk about really briefly. Wild strawberry on the right. That's something that a lot of people think is it's a weed. It's something that grows in your grass you don't want, but it's very beneficial to pollinators. The fruits are eaten by lots of different animals, and it also is very beneficial to soil. It's an aggressive spreader, which is, in the context of what we're going to talk about, a good thing, but it's a good one that a lot of people think is an enemy. The one in the middle is goldenrod. Again, fantastic, important species for pollinators, for birds, and does not cause allergies. I know a lot of people confuse it with ragweed. For a long time, because they bloom at the same time, people thought that this was the culprit for allergies. For most people, it's not. It is, in fact, ragweed, not goldenrod. So there's no reason to pull it, and lots of reasons to keep it in your yard. And then the final one on the left is a native oak tree, a white oak tree. And if you take away nothing, if you don't do any rewilding, plant one of these in your yard. Because native oak trees, first of all, acorns, they feed lots of creatures, everything from squirrels and bears and possum and raccoons and everything. But what's more important from my perspective to a native oak tree is the insects. So a white oak tree, native one, can support 550 different types of caterpillars. So, which means that they can live on this tree, they can survive on this tree. Non-native trees, by contrast, this is a really common one, a ginkgo from Asia. Nothing really eats the berries unless you're a starving squirrel. That's about it. That will eat those, they're pretty nasty smelling. But it's a beautiful tree, and a lot of cities, for instance, or towns have started putting these in as street trees. Well, when you think about the fact that a white oak tree can support 550 caterpillars, this can only support 5. So not a big deal if they're just a few, but if it's something that all of a sudden this is what people are putting in, and then you add to the fact that most of our yards are not really supporting pollinators and birds in the way that they need to, it really has a major effect on the system. So the final thing before we get into the steps to rewild is that native plants are excessively important because some species need one type of plant to really survive. So you've probably heard monarch butterflies are in trouble, they're in huge decline. That is for a number of different reasons, but one of them is that there's less and less milkweed out there. And milkweed is the only plant that they can successfully lay their eggs on. I think when people are thinking of, well, there are lots of plants that they can drink from, they can get nectar from this flower, this flower, this flower. Yes, they can, the adults can survive, but they can't, procreate without the host plants that they lay their eggs on. So those become really important. And there's one that I want to talk about today, because I feel like if a lot of us start putting in the native plants that this guy needs, I think we could help save it. So this is the Karner blue butterfly. It's tiny, it's beautiful. This is what it looks like when its wings are up. And if you don't know, the way to tell the difference between a butterfly and a moth is butterflies, their wings flap up, moths, their wings flap down when they fly. So that's the instant way to cheat and figure out what it is. But so this Karner blue butterfly is basically, it's called extirpated in Massachusetts, which means it's extinct in this state. Used to be widespread, and that's because of this plant. This plant, wild lupine, is the only plant that the Karner blue needs. It desperately needs this plant, and if it's gone, that butterfly cannot survive. There's not much of this around anymore. So There have been successful efforts to bring Cardinal blues back to New Hampshire. So I feel like, okay, well, that's not far. We can, if we have enough of this plant around us, we could help this species to survive. And there are a lot of there are butterflies that are only found anymore on Martha's Vineyard, but are not found in Massachusetts, the rest of Massachusetts. So I feel like we really can make a difference and start shifting things back. Okay, so in terms of rewilding, can you just stop mowing your lawn? There is a big trend of just kill your lawn, stop mowing, or mow less often. And that is a good trend, absolutely, when you're talking about the environment. I mean, your neighbors aren't going to necessarily love you, but you really will be doing good things, because under your grass is very likely a seed bank of native plants that are just waiting for their chance to come up, or that might have a chance to actually thrive if your grass is a little bit taller. And usually that's taller than the height of a credit card, is the way to, credit card on its side. That's a good, you don't need to make it shorter than that. That will help some of these native plants that are under the surface come to the surface. The one that I've pictured here, jewelweed, it is not one, if you're mowing, you're never going to really get it because it grows to be a little bit taller. But a lot of these seeds are in fact under your grass, just waiting for their chance. You might also have a bunch of non-native, but either neutral or beneficial plants that are waiting under the grass too. I know everyone hates dandelions, but they are actually wonderful nitrogen fixers, so they're good for your soil. And in early spring, right now, they are one of the few things that if an insect comes out of hibernation, different pollinators, different bees are out looking for something. It's one of the few things that they can reliably find. Clovers, same thing, they're fantastic. I'm actually, anytime that I have a patch of dirt in my grass area, I put white clover seed in, and I don't know why more people don't like clover. It's attractive, it's dark green, it's drought resistant, you don't need to mow it. It's this low on the ground, it's nice to walk on, feeds birds and bees. I think it's amazing. Even crabgrass doesn't harm anything, even though we don't love it. Plantain on the upper right, that's like a fantastic thing for rabbits. They'll eat that maybe instead of your garden. And actually it's a native remedy for itchy. Like if you have a mosquito bite, you crush some of the leaves and just rub it on the mosquito bite, and it really, really helps. So there are lots of benefits. So there might be a lot of good things under your lawn that are waiting if you just stop mowing. But the reason that that's probably not enough for rewilding is all of these guys. And these are just a handful of some of the invasive non-native plants that we have in our area. And I'm sure, unfortunately, that you have at least a couple of these. So upper right is Creeping Charlie. It was brought here deliberately because people thought it would be a nice ground cover, which it sure is. And then Bittersweet. I recently moved, and I think I have a bittersweet sanctuary on my property. It is just, we have bittersweet vines like this big around.
How do you get rid of it?
It's at the end of the thing. Contact me because I can tell you the best techniques. It's not easy, but the basic thing is just keeping at it, cutting it down and throwing away the berries as opposed to letting them. You can't compost them because birds eat them and then they spread them elsewhere. So that's the problem. But it can take down an adult, beautiful, mature tree. That's how terrible this stuff is. This is black swallowwort, which I'll talk about a little bit later because it is the devil. It is the devil plant, and it's literally it's spreading down right here down 3A. It's in Situate. It's a bad problem in Cohasset and Hingham. It's a real problem.
Does it look like blackberry?
No, it's got. I'll show. There's a picture that I'll show you later. It has tiny black flowers, purpley black flowers in about July, and then it has these pods that they call it string beans. They look fatter than that, but that's what's the telltale thing to look for. But I will talk about it later because it's so bad. Garlic mustard is how my group got started. It can wipe out the undercarriage of or understory of a forest, and basically kill a forest over a couple generations because nothing else can grow. And it's in all of our forests, so we're actively getting rid of it a lot. And then multiflora rose is, on the scale of these things, it's the least bad of all of these. So it at least has some very good benefits to wildlife. So it's a prolific spreader. But if you just stop mowing and you do the other steps that I'm going to talk about, you'll likely get a bunch of these, because nature abhors a vacuum, and if you've got this lovely new area, these will come in. So that's why you need to do the other steps that I'm going to talk about as opposed to just stopping mowing, even though just stopping mowing or mowing less frequently is a really good thing to do. Okay, these are the steps to rewilding. And actually, one of them, step number 1 is pretty easy, choosing your spot. And step number 3 is one you can actually skip, but we'll talk about it. It's kind of extra credit step, making the compost even better. So when I talk about choosing your spot, the reason I mention this is, and the reason that I don't have lots of photographs to show you of beautiful rewilding projects, is that it's messy. Nature is messy. So if you're talking about rewilding, this is going to be an area that's going to not be your showpiece. This is not going to be a garden part that you're going to show off to the world and, oh, look at my beautiful front lawn. It's going to be an area that's a little raggedy, and that's kind of the point. That's what creatures like. So choose a spot where you're not going to see it. For me, I have a spot next to my garage that sort of abuts like some really tall hedges. I'm not going to see it. My neighbors aren't going to see it. It's not going to bother anyone, so it's kind of perfect. But that's one thing that I always say. Pick a spot where you're going to realize that you're going to leave the stuff alone and not mind that the stuff is there. So the next step, this is the most important one, don't use any kind of chemicals. Certainly in that area, and preferably not at all. Whenever I'm talking to people, I always talk about this, because anybody who knows me knows I love dogs more than anything in the world, and I think that people are willing to do a lot for their dogs. So there are really strong connections between these long chemicals and cancer in dogs. There have been studies as far back as the 90s, different types of lymphomas that are not common and other than in places where these chemicals are used. And the studies, the one that was done by Tufts, followed people who kept their dogs off the lawn for the 48 hours after it had been sprayed. So they're finding that the cancer is increased. It's up to 200% more likely for them to get these kind of cancers. So that's why when I see these signs, I'm like, I keep my dogs away, and I always like to tell people it's really something that's very dangerous for your dogs, certainly for songbirds, certainly for butterflies. So I just want to mention that one. Okay, so this is the step that I said you could skip. You're going to be using compost, but you don't have to enrich it. But I want to mention this because biochar is so incredible. If you don't know about it, it's definitely something worth looking into. And I think that Debbie Cook is here today, I think, selling little gallon bags of biochar. It's basically like a soil amendment. It's made when you burn organic material without oxygen. And I think it was discovered or invented by indigenous tribes in the Amazon who did this, and then they could create really fertile land of places that was not fertile. So it increases the health of plants. It increases the likelihood that the plants will survive really well. It makes you have to water things less, seals moisture in a positive way or distributes it. And it is incredible for global warming or climate change because it absorbs carbon and it locks carbon in, which can offset some of the facts that we've got too much carbon out there warming things up. So I like to mention it. If you want to use it, the reason I put it here at this step is you need to do something and then leave it for 2 weeks before you use your compost. So I recommend commercial compost because unfortunately a lot of the free compost that you get at at dumps and stuff have invasive plant seeds in them, or something even worse that I'm about to show you. But if you are going to use it, you buy a bag of like a 1 cubic foot bag of the compost. I love this brand, which they have here. Cut an X in the top of it. Sprinkle in about a gallon of the biochar. Mix it around. Leave it for 2 weeks, and then you're going to water it before you spread the mulch, and it will do its magic. But the reason I said I prefer that you buy or that you get, if you make your own compost, awesome, but I prefer that you get something store-bought in that way is because of these awful Asian jumping worms. They render the soil almost unable to grow anything. They're really bad. The one benefit for us is that the worm itself can't survive a New England winter, but the eggs can. So the eggs can live, and that's why we still have a problem, or why the problem is spreading. So it's one reason I get store-bought compost. I don't get plants from friends really anymore unless I know for sure they don't have it, just because it's hard to get rid of them once you have them. If you do have them, I've got a resource at the end of somewhere you can reach out to that they can tell you about identifying and what to do. But just so you know, the earthworm, these move more like snakes. They're really kind of creepy, and nothing against snakes, but it's real. They're really, and they stay very close to the surface of the soil, whereas earthworms tend to go down this way, and they do really beneficial stuff. Although earthworms aren't native either. Earthworms are from Europe, so but they're helpful. They're a benefit. So, okay. So the next step when you're rewilding and you've chosen your area, you've prepared your compost if you're going to do that, is to smother the area with unwaxed cardboard. You don't need to weed it. You don't need to do anything. You just need to make sure, if they're really, really tall weeds or something, cut them down, and then just spread the cardboard exactly where you want to do it. Amazon boxes work well, they're not waxed, liquor store boxes, all that kind of stuff. Probably, if you're like me, there's plenty of cardboard around. And then you're going to cover it with your mulch mixture, or just regular mulch. And a minimum of 2 inches up to 4 inches is what you want. That's sort of the perfect amount. I mention this because if you think you're going to be needing to walk through that area, plan for it now and put down some pavers, because the whole goal of this is make this area wild and then do not mess with it. Don't prune it, don't mow it, don't trim it, nothing. You want to just kind of leave it as is. So you want to plan now if you're going to need to ever get through that way. And some of the plants that I'm going to recommend get pretty tall. So it's a smart thing to do. Okay, so then you're going to pick some plants, and if you want to do seeds, which is cheaper and maybe easier, the best time is early spring, so this is a good time to sort of start this kind of project, or fall. You can do regular plants if you want, later in the season. It just means you're probably going to have to water more intensely. So I think seeds is a really easy, sort of cheap way to go. And the reason we're doing this at all, the reason we're not just letting nature decide what's going to grow here, is so we give nature a leg up and put in some of the good stuff that will hopefully spread pretty quickly, so that it will crowd out the bad invaders that we talked about earlier. Okay, so some of the specific plants that I recommend. Obviously, it depends on whether it's shady or sunny where you're going to do this. The area that I'm doing is shady, so these are some of the plants that I'm going to put in. Wild ginger is a plant that's a wonderful ground cover. When it's thick, like in this picture on the left, you don't realize, but there are flowers that bloom underneath the leaf canopy. And they look to insects like a dead animal carcass. Highly appealing to insects. So they crawl in, and if they've just been born in the early spring and it's still really cold out, they go in there for warmth, and then they help pollinate, because then when they come out, maybe they've taken some of the stuff with them to the next place they go. So wild ginger, for this reason, is really good. It's a host plant for the butterfly you see here. So they lay there, they specifically look for it, and lay their eggs on it. But then all these other little creatures, little bugs, use the flowers and the seeds. And ants really love the seeds. Ants are super important. People don't realize this, but a huge percentage of our wildflowers are actually planted by ants. I don't know whether they're taking the seeds and digging them up for later and then they forget and then they, I don't really know much about ant mentality, but they are very important to planting wildflowers. So the next one is ostrich ferns. I know people love these when they look great, and then they hate them at the end of the season when they look ratty. But they are really important habitat. They're really important places for frogs to hide, turtles to hide. They give them a cool, safe sort of spot. So these are the kinds of things where you can imagine that the average lawn is pristine and perfect and neat. There's not many places for these little creatures to safely hide. These ferns will really do it, and they are aggressive spreaders, so it will help whatever area you've chosen to rewild. It will help populate it quickly with the right kind of plant. Another shady plant I recommend is great blue lobelia. It's really attractive, tall. It attracts hummingbirds, all kinds of pollinators, but the reason I specifically want to mention it is for bumblebees. So bumblebees, I should know this. I think there are 11 species of bumblebees in Massachusetts, a couple of which have already gone extinct. And there's one species that's doing super well. So most of the time when you see a bumblebee, it's that one, because that one can handle invasive plants. But a lot of our native ones need native plants like this. So I always recommend this as a good plant to put in to help the bumblebees. If your area is sunny, two of the plants that we talked about earlier is keystone plants, wild strawberry and sweet goldenrod. There are a few different goldenrods. This particular variety I think is one of the better ones for a sunny area. And this will really help attract pollinators, butterflies, birds to your yard. And goldenrod's fantastic because it's blooming at a time when a lot is already not blooming anymore. So it's really helping birds at a time when they need it.
Lisey, is that a spreader?
Yes. All of the ones that I'm recommending are aggressive spreaders. So it's why it might not be what you want to put in if you're talking about your pretty garden beds, but it's perfect for a wild spot because you don't mind if it takes over. And then it takes over, and when things are more densely covered, there's not as much space for an invasive plant to get in. So this, I've used the Latin name here. It's mountain mint, but there are a bunch of different mountain mints, and this is the one that I really, really recommend for sunny areas. I'm happy because this is the one, whereas I live on a bittersweet farm, we have a lot of mountain mint. And it is the most alive part of our yard by a mile. It's certain times of year when the flowers are out, they're very fragrant, so they attract butterflies from a great distance and pollinators, so it's like buzzing. And then the rest of the year, like winter and in early spring, it's just alive with birds. Those flowers die into seed heads and the birds go nuts. And it's a lot of the birds that you really want, goldfinches and migrating warblers and things like that really like it, orioles. So it's kind of fun if you're a bird person.
Is it edible?
I don't know. A lot of these plants are, but I imagine it's not because I have never heard that it is, Okay, so for spots that are both shady, sunny, or a mix of both, jewelweed is something that I really, really recommend. And it's a plant that so many people just pull as a weed. It's also called touch-me-not. There are a lot of other names for it. It is a hummingbird magnet. They absolutely love it, and it's blooming at a time of the year when hummingbirds need to bulk up for their migration south. So it becomes really, really important. The reason I have poison ivy up there on the right is because it's a natural antidote to poison ivy, or it's believed to be. You find a lot of natural soaps and salves that have jewelweed in it. I swear by it, and this is not scientific, but I am constantly leaning over while, I've got poison ivy constantly rubbing on me all the time. And I haven't had poison ivy in like 5 years. So I've paid attention to where it is. So if I'm walking in the woods and I know I'm going to be weeding some invasive plants, I sort of know, okay, I saw some jewelweed over there. And then if I rub up against it, I break open the stalk of jewelweed, and it's very liquidy inside, and like kind of wash the area that I think got the poison ivy on it with it. I swear by it, because I used to have poison ivy just constantly. So it's just kind of a nice little thing, but it's a fantastic plant for, I mean, lots of things will eat it. Deer eat it, rabbits eat it, but if there's enough of it and you've got the flowering portions, it's incredible for hummingbirds. Better for them than just about anything else that we could give them. So another one for shady or sunny areas, common blue violets. And I think this is something, it's a wonderful host plant for 30 different moths and butterflies. And some of our moths are incredible, like the giant leopard moth or hummingbird moths. I mean, we have like amazing, it's not just butterflies that are wonderful. Birds eat the seeds, turkeys, mourning doves love it, and pollinators love the flowers. But when you Google common blue violet, this is just to me, this unfortunately sums up kind of our mindset. One of the biggest things that will come up is lawn care companies telling you how to get rid of this dangerous weed that's killing your grass, and it's like, no, this is a wonderful native plant that's supposed to be here, that really nurtures wildlife, and I would love to see us have more, and I think it's adorable. I love violets, so. Okay, so once you've done all this, you've picked your spot, you've smothered it with cardboard, you've put down the mulch, you've seeded, you do need to water the first season only. And I'd say 2 to 3 times a week if it's not super rainy. And you do, I'll be honest and say I often use a hose, which is sort of cheating if you're trying to be true environmentalist. It's much better to use rainwater so that you're not wasting resources or the energy needed to filter water. But I think in truth, when you put in, when you're rewilding, or if you put in a pollinator garden or a meadow like this, the net benefit is way greater even if you're using the hose and watering, because you are going to be creating something that for ages is going to give back to nature. But obviously the best thing is to get a rain barrel set up underneath your gutter, or multiple ones. They've got a little spigoty thing at the bottom so you can fill up a watering can. It doesn't work with the hose. I've bought hose adapters to it. It never seems to have enough pressure. So really this is going to be a hand watering thing, and it's better for smaller areas. But you are going to have to water 2 to 3 times a week just until the plants get established. And then the last thing you have to do is just watch for invasive plants occasionally. If you've put in a bunch of good ones, hopefully they're going to spread soon, and you're going to not create this inviting spot for invasive plants. But because some of our invasive plants are spread by birds, or they're spread by air, like this guy, these are 3 I'm about to show you that you may get that I want you to watch for. And if you have this one, contact me at the information I'll give at the end of this talk, because I want to show you how to get rid of it, because it's so dangerous. The reason it's terrible, A, it destroys the soil completely. It makes it so that the soil, nothing else can grow in that soil. And in areas where it's really prevalent, it was brought to they think Harvard for the first time as a botanical specimen, and then either escaped or was deliberately planted. So we have it worse than anyone. Massachusetts has it worse than anyone. But I used to live in Boston, and in Cambridge, Somerville, Charlestown, people have to literally remove their entire lawns, throw them away, and start with a new lawn because they become infected by this stuff. So nip it. It's the ultimate, a stitch in time saves 9. Like, you really, really want to nip it in the bud. These are kind of out of order because this is what it looks like probably in July. It has these tiny little purple flowers, like they're the size of the light you can see through my hand. And they're purpley black flowers. Later on, they develop these pods, which are which are the main problem in terms of how they're spreading. And then probably in September, late August, maybe as early as late August, September, the pods dry up, pop open, and the seeds disperse through the air. About a mile in all directions, they can get there, although a lot of them stay close by. They're like dandelion fluff, so they go everywhere. The reason that I said this is like the devil, aside from killing everything else that you love in your lawn, is that they deliberately kill monarch butterflies. So it's a cousin of milkweed, but it's from like Portugal, Spain, south of France. It should never have met monarch butterflies. But because it's now here where monarchs are, they, when they're looking for a place to lay their eggs and they think they can't find any milkweed, which is what they need, they can increasingly find this. They lay their eggs on it, and then the second those caterpillars hatch, they take a bite of the leaf and they die. So it literally is one of the major threats to monarch butterflies, and it's all over. It's Wheelwright Park in Cohasset. Like, we see it, and we'll see monarchs circling, and we're like, go, go, go. It's just awful. So be on the lookout for that one. The other one is bittersweet. So this is one, it's a little bit easier to get rid of, even though it's like a monster. You do need to cut any vines. If you can reach the berries, throw them away in a sealed trash bag. But if you've got a very prolific vine on a heavy tree, a big mature tree, you don't want to be yanking on those branches because you may do more damage. So you just have to kind of like not look at those horrible berries and wait till they've been dispersed. But by severing the root, you will make sure that plant eventually dies. And then you look in an area where there has been bittersweet. I pick up the orange berries where I see them having fallen. And bittersweet vines, if you just kind of pull them as you see them come, you can absolutely keep it in check. But you need to not compost any of these invasive plants. You can't compost them, you have to throw them away.
So if you just were to, I have a lot of this.
Yeah.
So if you just cut it, does that kill the plant?
It doesn't kill it, but it eventually weakens it. If you keep cutting it and cutting it and cutting it, it eventually the plant kind of gives up. So you just keep cutting, making sure it can't get a foothold, and eventually it will give up and go somewhere else, unfortunately. Okay, so Japanese knotweed, this is another one that you likely might get. We have a lot of it here. It spreads both by rhizomes, by its roots, and by winged seeds that spread in the early fall. It is again one of those, get it right away, because once you get it established, it's really, really hard to kill. And I always tell this story at talks, because when I was first researching how to get rid of Japanese knotweed, I came across this website that was like, Japanese knotweed can be your new hobby. Trying to get rid of Japanese. I'm like, I don't need I don't need another new hobby. This does not sound fun to me. But there is a really promising technique for Japanese knotweed that I won't get into now, but it doesn't involve chemicals. It's much easier than what most people are doing, and it's been much more effective, because in the UK, Japanese knotweed I guess, really loves the climate there, so it's even a worse problem than here. And a lot of homeowners, if they have it on their property, they can't get insurance. So they can't sell their house. It's a huge deal. So this technique was something that was invented there that really can help.
Would there be a link to that technique?
Yeah. So the best thing is to, I think it's definitely on our website at wildcohasset.org. Invasive plant resources. It'll show you like this links to that. The product that works, it's like a grid that you use on the ground. I don't believe it's sold here, but you could just buy it at Home Depot and retrofit it. So, but definitely check it out at wildcohasset.org, because it's way easier and it will eventually kill the plant. So once you've done all that, that's it. Now you get the fun of what is visiting your yard, now that your yard is wilder. So I give these three. These are my favorite apps that are, if you have a smartphone, that I absolutely love. The Merlin Bird app is the gold standard for birds, and it is, you can get free ones. I upgrade to the subscription service because it has more features. I don't remember exactly what the free one doesn't have that it has, but you can, first of all, it step by step takes you through where you are, how big the bird is, what it looked like, what it was doing, so that it can then give you, okay, was it this one, this one, this one, or this one? And then you can say that, yep, that's my bird, so it can keep track of your lifetime birds. And also you can press a button and it will listen and it will tell you what that call is, what that bird. And I identified an owl the other day that I never saw, but with that app, it's just really cool. So the LEPs by Field Guide, that's a butterfly and moth one, which is again really good because I'm really interested in both butterflies and moths, but there are a whole lot of them and it can be really, really helpful. That's the one that I think most people think is the best one. And then the one on the upper right, picture this, that is, there are a million apps that can supposedly tell you what a plant is. I find they're wrong a lot of the time. Like literally, you're like, it's a tulip, and it'll be like, oh, that is an Asian chrysanthemum. You're like, that's a tulip. So this one, picture this, is I think the best one, and it's right the most amount of times. What I would say though is, if really in doubt, like if you're like, oh my gosh, is this terrible invasive plant or is it something benign? I use it to identify, and then you might want to then Google what it says it is and make sure that it really is what it says it is, because that's how I've found. There have been a couple times it's been off, but most of the time it's really good. So I found it to be super helpful. And just when you're out, you're curious, what is that thing? It's kind of fun to be able to find out. So I want to give you some resources, and I think this talk will be online so that you can access these at any time, and you can always just go to wildcohasset.org and click Contact Us, and you'll get me, and then I can answer any questions if I can. So the first one is biochar. So it's not so easy to find this. It's not like it's at every nursery or something. So Debbie Cook may be here today, and I haven't checked out. She is? Oh, good. Okay, so she has a table, and I think she's selling the small bags of it. But she is a super expert. She'll tell you exactly what to do, why. It's really fascinating. And then Vinny Buca is in Norwell, and he also sells, I think, larger amounts. So, but these are two great sources if you're interested in biochar, because I think it's really, really amazing. Once you hear about it, it's kind of very exciting for gardeners. And then this little one, there are a lot of calculators for how much compost you need, but if you're like math challenged, like I am, it can be nice to kind of tell you how much you need based on how, I want 4 inches, this big, it can tell you. So that little, you point your smartphone at that little guy, and it can tell you. Again, there are tons of calculators. You could just sort of Google them. So Asian jumping worms. Almost every state has a department like this, a Center for Agriculture, Food, and the Environment. And this is the one in Massachusetts. They can direct you to resources about how to identify it and what to do. And I can also, if you reach out to me, I can also sort of guide you in the right way. I'm not an expert on these things, but they are. Okay, this is so fun, and this is something I always tell people about. It's an Audubon Society, little interactive guidelines to certain native plants. You put in your zip code, and you have to put in your email, so they probably will reach out to you, the Audubon Society, but you can then see any kind of native plant that's good for your region by category, so perennials, shrubs, trees, and it will tell you what specific birds are attracted to that or helped by that plant. So it's really fun. Like if you know you want to put in a shrub and you adore hummingbirds, you can sort of choose accordingly. So I always recommend people check that out. So these are places that I recommend for getting native plants and native plant seeds. Now, the reason that I mention these specifically is because a lot of plants that are marketed as native are not really native. They are a native plant that maybe some human tinkered with to make better, So like maybe there's a plant that blooms once during the growing season. Some horticulturist has thought, oh, wouldn't it be great if it bloomed 4 times? So they're hybrids, they're cultivars, they're not strictly native the way they would be growing wild before 1492. So these organizations will, with the exception of Holly Hill Farm, which is they have incredible plant sales, the largest selection of an organic plant sales, but they're not all native. But they will list when they are native plants, and if they're native, they're the right kind of natives. But the other ones are native, and are really great sources to get seeds, plants, bare root plants, all that kind of stuff. And finally, this is me. So this is our organization. We use volunteers to get rid of invasive plants, to put in native plants, basically to help wildlife by advocating for native plants. And we have a lot of resources on the site about how to get rid of the bad stuff, good stuff, etc. And you can, as I said, click contact me, and then you can get in touch with me if anything that I've talked about you want more info on. So that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody's got them. Thank you.